Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are shifting our focus to a system that, well, it defines how we experience reality, yet it's one we completely ignore until it fails. We are talking about vision, but we aren't just talking about seeing in the abstract. We're talking about the incredibly precise, just unforgiving machinery that makes sight possible. We're tearing down the eye, conceptually, of course, to look at the cells, the membranes, and the physics.
And we're doing that by looking at what happens when that machinery breaks.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating area of study. When we look at the source material for this dive, specifically the eye chapter in Robinson-Contran Pathologic Basis of Disease, there's a sentiment right at the start that really grabs you.
Oh.
It frames vision not just as a biological function, but as a massive quality of life issue. They mentioned a statistic that I think sets the stakes just perfectly. After cancer, blindness is the second most feared disease among the public.
Wow, that is a heavy statement.
Isn't it?
The second most feared. It puts it right up there with mortality itself. It really speaks to how much our autonomy, our independence, is tied to this one organ.
It absolutely does. And Robbins uses a very specific anecdote to illustrate why. They describe a retired school teacher who develops age-related macular degeneration.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you're a pathologist looking at this teacher's eye under a microscope, the actual physical change, the pathology, it looks remarkably unimpressive.
What do you mean?
It's just some small scarring, some cellular debris in the macula. It's millimeter scale stuff.
So structurally, if you were just glancing at the slide, it looks like a minor scratch.
Exactly. It looks trivial. But the functional impact is
Catastrophic.
completely catastrophic.
Yeah.
Because those tiny spars are right in the center of the visual field. This teacher, who used to be a model of independence, suddenly can't read a book.
Can't see their grandchildren's faces.
Can't see their faces. They lose their driver's license. They lose their autonomy. And that really captures the core theme we're going to explore today. The eye is a system where structure must remain absolutely clear and precise for perception to survive.
Where structure must remain clear for perception to survive. I like that. That's the through line for this whole deep dive.
It has to be.
Because unlike the liver, where you can lose a huge chunk of it and it regenerates, or the lungs, where you have reserve capacity, the eye seems to have, zero tolerance for error?
Zero tolerance is exactly right. It is a game of millimeters and often micrometers. If the cornea clouds by a fraction, you're blind. If the retina detaches by a hair's breadth, the lights go out.
Right.
But there is another unique aspect to this deep dive that makes it so special for clinicians. The eye is the only place in the entire human body where a physician can look directly at a blood vessel or nerve tissue without cutting the patient open.
That's a great point. I've never really thought about it that way. You look right through the pupil.
It is a literal window into the body. When a doctor uses an ophthalmoscope, they aren't just checking your vision. They're looking at your systemic health.
So they can see things like hardening of the arteries.
Arteriosclerosis right in the retinal vessels. They can see the effects of high blood pressure. They can see angiogenesis, that's new blood vessel growth, driven by things like diabetes. It's the only place where the body's internal microcirculation is just on display.
So our mission today is to act as that ophthalmoscope. We're going to traverse this organ, moving from the outside in.
A full tour.
We'll start with the bony socket, the orbit move to the eyelids, across the surface of the conjunctiva and cornea, then dive into the fluid-filled anterior chamber with the lens, and end up at the very back with the retina and the uvea.
A journey to the center of the eye.
Precisely. And, just a quick disclaimer before we really launch into this.
Now, this is important.
This is a conceptual map. We are synthesizing some really complex pathology here. We're leaning heavily on Robbins today, and while our broader series often pulls in Underwood's pathology for that mechanistic clarity.
Which we love.
Today is a true deep dive into the Robbins chapter. But if you're a medical student or a professional listening to this, you still need to read the text. This is the deep dive. It's not the board exam.
Oh, absolutely. Think of this as the scaffolding. You have to go build the building yourself.
All right, let's start at the very beginning. The container, the orbit.
The orbit. Right. Most people just think of it as the eye socket, a hole in the skull. But pathologically, you need to think of it as a fixed, rigid, bony cone.
It doesn't expand.
It does not expand.
Yeah.
And that rigidity creates a very specific physics problem.
A volume problem, because it's a closed box.
Exactly. You have the eye, the muscles, the nerves, and the fat all packed into this cone. Now, if the volume of the contents increases, whether it's swelling, a tumor, inflammation, or bleeding,
There's nowhere for it to go but forward.
Nowhere. It can't go back into the brain. It can't go sideways through the bone. So physics dictates it must go forward.
And that is what we call proptosis, the bulging eye.
Correct. Proptosis. Now, clinically, this is so crucial. It's not just, oh, the eye looks prominent. If the eye bulges too far forward, the eyelids physically cannot close over it. That's a condition called lygophthalmos.
And if you can't blink,
You lose your primary defense.
the cornea dries out.
It dries out. You get ulceration, you get infection. It's a domino effect that starts with just simple volume displacement.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting for a diagnostician. The direction of the bulge tells you a story about what is happening behind the scenes.
So you can sort of triangulate the tumor just by looking at the angle of the eye?
To an extent, yes.
Mhm.
We distinguish between axial proptosis and positional proptosis. Axial means the eye is being pushed straight forward, like a piston.
Okay. So whatever is pushing it must be directly behind it, in the center of the cone.
Right. It implies a mass inside what we call the muscle cone. The classic examples would be tumors of the optic nerve itself, like a glioma or a meningioma.
Because the nerve is the central axis.
Right, in the center axis, so the push is straight out.
And positional proptosis is the opposite.
Positional is when the eye is displaced to the side, or up or down. That tells you the mass is outside the muscle cone, pushing from the periphery.
Ah.
A classic example is the lacrimal gland, the tear gland. It sits up in the upper outer corner of the orbit, so if you have a tumor there, it pushes the eye down and in.
That is fascinating. It's simple vector physics applied to anatomy.
It really is.
Now, we can't talk about bulging eyes without talking about the most common cause, the one everyone has seen pictures of. Thyroid eye disease? Graves' disease.
Classic staring look. But the mechanism here is really specific and, frankly, quite strange. In Graves' ophthalmopathy, you get an accumulation of extracellular matrix proteins and fibrosis. But here is the key.
Okay.
It happens specifically in the rectus muscles.
The muscles that actually move the eyeball.
Yes. But it's not the whole muscle unit. The text describes the muscle bellies becoming huge. They look like sausages on a scan.
Sausages.
Yeah, they get distended and swollen with this inflammatory material. But, and this is a crucial visual for the pathologist, the tendons of the muscles are usually spared.
Why is that distinction important?
Well, it helps distinguish it from other conditions like, say, myositis, where the whole unit is inflamed. In Graves', you have these swollen, sausage-like muscle bellies taking up huge amounts of space in that bony cone we talked about.
And the cone can't expand.
So the eye is shoved forward, and that gives you that characteristic stare.
Mm.
And clinically, this can be a real curveball because it can happen even if the patient's thyroid levels are currently normal. The eye disease can run a separate course from the systemic hormone levels.
That's tricky. Now, moving away from thyroid issues, we have to talk about infection. The orbit is located in a really dangerous neighborhood, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The danger triangle of the face. The orbit is just. It's surrounded by sinuses. The floor of the orbit is the roof of the maxillary sinus. The inner wall is right next to the ethmoid sinuses.
So a bad sinus infection is a real threat.
It's a huge threat. It can breach that thin bone and spill right into the orbit.
The text got pretty dark here, especially regarding diabetic patients.
Yes. In diabetics, particularly those in ketoacidosis, or really any immunosuppressed patient, we worry about aggressive fungal infections, things like mucor or aspergillus.
And these aren't your typical athlete's foot fungi.
No, not at all. These are aggressive invaders that can eat through bone, invade the orbit, and even march straight back into the brain. It's a true medical emergency.
That is terrifying. But then Robbins mentioned something called pseudotumor, which, the name implies it looks like a tumor, acts like a tumor, but it isn't a tumor.
Yes, idiopathic orbital inflammation, or orbital pseudotumor. It's a great name because it describes the clinical confusion perfectly. You see a mass on the scan, you see proptosis, you think, that's cancer.
But it's not.
But when you biopsy it, you don't see cancer cells. You see inflammatory fibrosis.
Mm-hmm.
The body is replacing orbital fat with scar tissue and inflammatory cells.
Why?
That's the idiopathic part we don't always know. But the source material makes a very important point here about diagnostic rigor.
Okay.
You can't just slap a label of idiopathic on it and walk away. You have to rule out other things first, specifically systemic conditions like IgG4-related disease or vasculitis like granulomatosis with polyangiitis.
So pseudotumor is a diagnosis of exclusion. You have to verify it's not part of a body-wide immune attack before you call it a local mystery.
Precisely. It's a reminder that the eye isn't an island. It's connected to the rest of the immune system.
Okay. Let's move outward from the socket to the shutters. The eyelids, now I usually just think of eyelids as skin flaps that keep the dust out, but the text calls them a hybrid.
They really are a complex transitional zone. Think about the anatomy. On the outside, it's skin epidermis.
Right.
On the inside, it's mucosa, the conjunctiva. And then sandwiched in between, you have muscles for blinking and these specialized glands called the tarsal or meibomian glands.
And those glands are the heroes of the tear film, right? They make
Right.
the oil.
They're the unsung heroes. They produce that lipid layer, the oil that sits on top of your tears. Without that oil, your watery tears would just evaporate instantly and you'd have terrible dry eye.
But because they're glands, they're prone to getting blocked,
Exactly. And this leads us to the distinction between a stye and a chalazion.
which everyone mixes up, right?
Constantly. A stye, or a hordeolum, is usually an infection, a little abscess right at the lash follicle. But a chalazion is different. It happens when a meibomian gland gets obstructed. It's not primarily an infection, it's a chemical reaction
A reaction to what?
to the oil itself. The lipid leaks out of the blocked gland into the surrounding tissue where it doesn't belong. The immune system sees this oil and just walls it off.
Ah.
It creates a granulomatous response. So you get this firm, painless nodule. It's called a lipogranuloma.
Lipogranuloma, literally a fat granule lump.
That's it. Usually harmless, just annoying. But, and here's where the stakes rise again, we have to talk about tumors. If you have a lump on your eyelid that looks like a chalazion but doesn't go away, you need to worry.
Because it might be the great masquerader.
Yes, sebaceous carcinoma. This is a scary tumor. It arises from those same oil glands. The reason it's so dangerous is that it mimics benign conditions.
Like a chalazion.
Exactly. It looks like a chalazion. Or it looks like chronic blepharitis,
Right.
just some inflammation. So a doctor might treat it with warm compresses and antibiotics for months, thinking it's just a blocked gland.
But meanwhile, the cancer is spreading.
It is. And unlike basal cell carcinoma, which is the most common eyelid cancer and usually just digs a local hole,
Right.
sebaceous carcinoma has this horrifying ability to spread intraepithelially. This is called pagetoid spread.
Describe that. What is the cancer actually doing?
So imagine the cancer cells aren't just forming a lump. They're skipping along the surface layer of the skin and the conjunctiva, spreading almost like a rash. It can crawl down into the ducts. It can spread to the parotid gland, the lymph nodes in the neck. The mortality rate could be upwards of 22% because of this delay in diagnosis.
That is significant. So the big takeaway is a stye or chalazion that doesn't resolve needs a biopsy.
Absolutely. Context is everything. And speaking of context, the text also mentioned Kaposi sarcoma on the eyelid.
Right. In the context of HIV/AIDS.
Yes. On the skin, Kaposi looks purple, but on the conjunctiva inside the lid, it looks bright red. So it can be mistaken for a subconjunctival hemorrhage, just a broken blood vessel.
Oh, I see.
But if you see that in an immunosuppressed patient, you have to think malignancy.
Okay. Let's peel back the eyelid and look at the surface of the eye itself. The conjunctiva. This is the mucous membrane that covers the white part of the eye.
The mucosal shield. And it has specific zones of vulnerability. You have the fornix, that's the deep pocket where the eyelid meets the eyeball. That area is rich in lymphoid tissue.
So that's where you'd see a lymphoma.
Exactly. If you're going to get a lymphoma of the eye, it usually happens there.
And then there's the limbus.
The limbus is critical. It's the borderline, the circle where the white sclera meets the clear cornea. This is where the ocular surface stem cells live. And because it's a site of high cellular turnover and activity, it's also where squamous cell neoplasms cancers tend to arise.
Okay. Now, looking at infections of this surface, Robin spent a lot of time on trachoma. I know this is a huge cause of blindness globally, but the mechanism is surprisingly mechanical.
It is a tragedy of scarring. Trachoma is caused by Chlamydia trachomatis. But the blindness doesn't come from the bacteria eating the eye directly. It comes from the body's own attempt to heal the infection.
Walk us through that sequence. What happens?
So you get the infection, you get chronic inflammation, and then, as with any chronic inflammation, you get scarring. This fibrosis happens in the fornix and on the inner eyelid.
Okay.
As that scar tissue contracts, it does two things. First, it destroys the goblet cells that make mucus, so you get incredible dry eye. But worse, the scar tissue shrinks and pulls the eyelid margin inward.
The lashes turn in.
Yes. It's called trichiasis. The eyelashes turn inward and scratch against the sensitive cornea every single time you blink.
Oh, that's awful.
It's like having sandpaper on your windshield. Eventually, the cornea, which needs to be perfectly clear, becomes opaque, white, and scarred. The patient goes blind from the mechanical abrasion caused by the scarring.
That is a horrific feedback loop.
It really is, and it emphasizes that structure for perception theme. The infection ruins the structure of the lid, which in turn ruins the structure of the cornea.
Let's talk about something maybe more common for our listeners who spend time outdoors: sun damage. The text distinguish between two things, pinguecula and pterygium.
Right, both consequences of UV light actinic damage.
Hmm.
A pinguecula is a small yellowish bump. It happens next to the cornea, usually on the nose side. It basically sun damage connective tissue solar elastosis.
And it's mostly a cosmetic issue.
Mostly. It's ugly, maybe a bit irritated, but it stays put. A pterygium, on the other hand, is aggressive. It's a wedge of fibrovascular tissue that migrates. It starts on the white part of the eye and literally grows onto the cornea. It dissects into the layers, destroying the Bowman layer.
It invades the window.
It does. And because it's growing under the cornea, it can physically warp the shape of the eye. It pulls on the cornea, causing astigmatism.
So your vision gets distorted.
Exactly. And if it grows far enough, it can block the pupil entirely.
So wear your sunglasses.
Absolutely. UV protection is not just cosmetic.
We should also touch on cancer of the conjunctiva. We mentioned squamous cell carcinoma, which implies a link to viruses, right?
Yes, there is a strong link to HPV human papillomavirus types 16 and 18. And just like in cervical cancer, you see a progression from mild dysplasia to carcinoma in situ.
But then there's melanoma. We usually think of melanoma on the skin. But it can happen on the surface of the eye, too? And Robbins pointed out a genetic detail here that I want to flag because it contrasts with what we'll see later inside the eye.
This is a crucial distinction for the deep dive.
Yeah.
Conjunctival melanoma, the one on the surface, often has BRAF mutations. This is the same mutation found in about half of skin melanomas.
Which implies they are biologically cousins?
Exactly. It implies that biologically, conjunctival melanoma behaves like skin cancer. It spreads to lymph nodes. It responds to BRAF inhibitors. It's going to be very, very important later when we talk about melanoma inside the eye, uveal melanoma, which is a completely different genetic beast.
Okay, stick a pin in that BRAF mutation fact. We will definitely come back to it. Let's move to the star of the show, structurally speaking, the cornea.
The window itself.
The cornea, the lens of precision. You know, most people think the lens inside the eye does all the focusing.
Right.
But actually, the cornea does most of the refractive work. It bends the light the most because the difference in refractive index between air and the cornea is huge.
So the cornea is the heavy lifter.
It is. And to do that, it has to be perfectly transparent. To be transparent, it has to be avascular. No blood vessels. Which makes sense. Blood vessels would cast shadows on your retina.
Exactly. And this avascularity is also why corneal transplants are so successful. It's an immunologically privileged site.
Ah.
The immune system doesn't patrol it as heavily because there are no highways, no vessels to deliver to the police, the immune cells.
But there's a catch to this transparency. The text mentions the pump.
Ah, yes, the pump. So the main body of the cornea, the stroma, naturally wants to absorb water. If you just left it alone, it would soak up fluid from the eye, swell, and turn cloudy, like frosted glass.
So how does it stay clear?
The bottom layer of the cornea, the endothelium, is a single layer of cells that acts as an active pump. It is constantly pumping fluid out of the cornea to keep it dehydrated and clear. It is fighting physics 24/7.
That is an incredibly active process for a piece of tissue that looks so passive.
It is relentless. But here's the problem. Those endothelial cells generally do not regenerate. You are born with a certain number. If they die, they're gone. The remaining cells just have to spread out and pump harder.
And that leads us directly to Fuchs' endothelial dystrophy.
Right. In Fuchs dystrophy, which is a genetic condition, those pump cells start to die off prematurely. They also produce these weird little drop-like deposits of basement membrane material called guttata.
And as the pump fails?
Fluid accumulates in the stroma, the cornea swells, you get edema.
And the vision clouds over?
It clouds over. And eventually you can get bullous keratopathy blisters forming on the surface of the eye because of all the fluid pushing out. It's painful and blinding.
The text mentioned a clinical trap here regarding cataract surgery.
Yes, this is so important. Cataract surgery is traumatic to the cornea. The ultrasound energy used to break up the lens can kill some endothelial cells.
Okay.
If a patient has borderline Fuchs dystrophy, they're just hanging on with a few cells left. The surgery can tip them over the edge. They get their cataract fixed, but their cornea decompensates and clouds up.
Out of the frying pan into the fire.
That's the one.
Now what about when the shape fails? Keratoconus.
Keratoconus is a failure of structural integrity. The cornea thins out, it gets weak. And because of the pressure inside the eye, that weak cornea bulges outward into a cone shape.
So instead of a nice spherical dome, you have a cone.
And you can't focus light through a cone. Glasses don't work because the astigmatism is so irregular.
And there's a dramatic complication mentioned here, hydrops.
Acute hydrops, yes. This is a structural collapse. The inner membrane of the cornea to cement membrane literally snaps because of the stretching.
A rupture.
A sudden rupture. Fluid from the anterior chamber rushes into the cornea. The eye suddenly turns white. It's a terrifying moment for the patient, often causing sudden blindness and pain.
It sounds like a dam breaking.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, let's go through the pupil and into the anterior segment. We have the lens and the fluid circulation. Let's talk about the lens first. The text used a concept regarding cell growth here that I've never heard before. Infoliation.
It's a great concept to understand cataracts. Think about your skin. Your skin cells grow, move to the surface, die, and slough off.
Right.
You shed your skin into the environment. Dust in the wind.
Okay.
But the lens is a closed system. It's wrapped in a tight capsule. It cannot shed cells. So as the lens epithelium grows throughout your life, the old cells get pushed into the center and compressed. They never leave. They just get packed tighter and tighter.
Like tree rings.
Yes, but imagine the tree rings are trapped inside a steel cage that doesn't get bigger. The lens gets denser and harder with age. This is nuclear sclerosis.
And that's a cataract.
That is the most common form of age-related cataract. The nucleus gets hard and turns yellow or brown. And Robbins mentions this fascinating artistic connection here. As the lens yellows, it acts like a filter, blocking blue light.
So your color perception changes.
Yes. They mention Rembrandt. If you look at his paintings from his later years, they have a predominance of yellow and brown hues.
Oh, wow.
It's speculated that this wasn't just a stylistic choice. It was his nuclear sclerotic cataracts filtering his view of the world. He was literally painting what he saw.
That is incredible, a biological filter changing art history.
It really is. Cataracts aren't just clouding. They are a fundamental change in the protein structure and color of the lens itself.
Now, this chamber, the anterior chamber, is full of fluid. And when the flow of that fluid goes wrong, we get one of the most famous eye diseases of all, glaucoma.
Glaucoma, the thief of sight. And we need to be very precise here. Glaucoma is not just high pressure.
It's not. I feel like that's the common definition.
It's the common misconception. Glaucoma is defined as optic nerve damage, which we see as cupping, and visual field loss. High pressure is the main risk factor, but you can have glaucoma with normal pressure, and you can have high pressure without glaucoma.
Okay.
But for our purposes in pathology, we focus on the pressure because that's the mechanical problem we can treat.
And the pressure comes from a plumbing problem.
The plumbing analogy is perfect. The eye produces fluid aqueous humor in the ciliary body. It flows through the pupil and drains out through a sieve called the trabecular meshwork. Production must equal drainage. If drainage slows down, pressure builds up.
So describe the two main types for us, open angle versus closed angle.
Right. In open-angle glaucoma, the physical access to the drain is wide open. The angle between the iris and the cornea is normal. But the filter itself, the trabecular meshwork, is clogged on a microscopic level. It's offering high resistance.
It's like a drain full of hair.
Or a coffee filter full of fine debris. And the text gives us this amazing list of the specific debris that can cause secondary glaucoma. You can have ghost cells.
Ghost cells.
Yeah. Imagine a patient had a hemorrhage in the eye a month ago. The red blood cells die. They lose their hemoglobin and become these rigid, empty shells ghosts. They don't squish through the filter like fresh cells, so they clog it.
That is incredibly vivid. What else?
Pigment. In pigmentary glaucoma, pigment granules flake off the back of the iris due to friction and just clog the drain. Or pseudoexfoliation, this weird dandruff-like fibrillar material that peels off the lens capsule and gums up the works.
Okay, so that's open angle. The door is open, but the drain is slow. What is angle closure?
Angle closure glaucoma is when the door is physically slammed shut. The iris itself is pushed or pulled forward, physically covering the drain.
This sounds more acute, more sudden.
It can be a true medical emergency. If the pupil gets blocked, pupillary block fluid builds up behind the iris. The iris bows forward like a sail catching wind. This is called iris bombay. It zips the angle shut against the cornea. Pressure spikes rapidly. Pain, nausea, blurry vision. It's a crisis.
And there is a specific, really nasty type mentioned, neovascular glaucoma. This connects back to the systemic window idea you brought up.
This is such a crucial mechanism. If you have a diabetic patient or someone with a retinal vein occlusion, their retina is starving for oxygen. It's ischemic.
So the retina calls for help.
It screams for help. It releases VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. It shouts, "Send blood." But this VEGF diffuses forward to the iris. It causes new blood vessels to grow on the iris surface.
New vessels sound good, though. More blood flow.
Not here. These vessels are messy, and they're accompanied by fibrous tissue. And as we know, scar tissue contracts. This fibrovascular membrane contracts and physically pulls the iris over the drain. It literally zips the angle shut.
Wow.
And it is incredibly difficult to treat because the anatomy is being physically distorted by this new tissue.
So ischemia in the back of the eye destroys the plumbing in the front of the eye.
A perfect example of how the eye is an interconnected ecosystem.
Speaking of the back of the eye, let's go deeper, past the lens, into the uvea. This is the vascular coat, the iris, ciliary body, and choroid.
The uvea is the nutritional layer. It's full of blood vessels. And because it's so vascular, it's the battlefield for inflammation. We call inflammation here uveitis.
The text highlights sarcoidosis here.
Yes, sarcoidosis loves the uvea. It produces granulomatous inflammation. And clinicians see these very distinct signs that Robbins describes with great food metaphors.
Oh.
On the cornea, you get mutton fat precipitates clumps of inflammatory cells that look like grease. And on the retina, you get paravascular inflammation that looks like candle wax drippings. These visual metaphors help doctors recognize the pattern immediately.
But the most dramatic story in the uvea section, and honestly maybe the whole chapter, is sympathetic ophthalmia.
This is a profound autoimmune tragedy. It really makes you question the wisdom of the body.
Set the scene for us.
Imagine a patient suffers a penetrating injury to one eye, a nail, a shard of glass, the eye is damaged, the doctors sew it up. But then weeks or even years later, the patient starts losing vision in the other eye, the healthy, uninjured eye.
The sympathizing eye.
Exactly. Why does this happen? It turns out retinal antigens are normally sequestered. The immune system doesn't know they exist. They are hidden behind the blood-retina barrier. They are privileged.
But the injury breaks the barrier.
The injury releases these hidden antigens into the body's circulation. The immune system sees them for the first time and says, "What is this foreign invader? Attack." It builds an army of T cells. And those T cells go hunting. They find the antigen in the injured eye, but they also find it in the pristine, uninjured eye.
So the body attacks its own vision.
It attacks the innocent eye. It causes a granulomatous panuveitis, total inflammation. It destroys the uvea. This is why, historically, if an eye was badly smashed and had no hope of vision, doctors would remove it immediately.
To save the other eye.
To prevent the immune system from learning the target in the first place.
To prevent the body from ever seeing the antigen.
Exactly. It's a biological case of friendly fire triggered by a breach in security.
That is chilling. Now we have to talk about cancer in the uvea. We talked about melanoma on the surface, the conjunctiva. Now let's talk about uveal melanoma inside the eye.
This is the most common primary intraocular malignancy in adults. And it is absolutely critical to understand how different it is from skin cancer. Remember the BRAF mutation we stuck a pin in?
Right. Skin and conjunctival melanoma have BRAF mutations.
Uveal melanoma does not. Instead, it has mutations in GNAQ or GNA11. These are G protein-coupled receptors, a totally different signaling pathway.
Why does that genetic detail matter so much to the patient?
It matters because the drugs that work for skin melanoma, the BRAF inhibitors, don't work for uveal melanoma. They are biologically distinct diseases. And the spread is different. Skin melanoma goes to lymph nodes. Uveal melanoma spreads through the blood.
And where does it go?
The liver. Over 90% of metastases go to the liver. It has this incredible, almost magnetic tropism for the liver.
And the prognosis?
It depends on the cell type. This is classic pathology. If the tumor is made of spindle cells, long, slender cells, the prognosis is better. If it's made of epithelioid cells, round, angulated, weird-looking cells, the prognosis is worse.
And what about size?
Interestingly, the shape of the tumor matters. Lateral extent, how wide it is, matters more than how tall it is.
So a flat, wide tumor is more dangerous than a tall, narrow one?
Generally, yes. It suggests a more invasive growth pattern.
We are in the final stretch. The retina and the vitreous. The film and the gel.
The retina is brain tissue. It's derived from the diencephalon.
Yeah.
It doesn't regenerate. If it dies, it's gone.
And we can see the vascular health here. The text distinguishes between flame hemorrhages and dot hemorrhages. Is this just random, or is there a reason for the shape?
It's pure geometry. If a blood vessel bursts in the superficial nerve fiber layer, the blood is constrained by the nerve axons, which run in parallel lines.
Ah.
So the blood spreads out in lines. It looks like a flame.
Okay. And a dot.
If the hemorrhage is deeper, in the vertical layers of the retina, the blood is trapped in these little cylinders between the cells. So when you look from the top down, you see a dot.
So the shape of the bleed tells you the depth of the injury. That is Sherlock Holmes level deduction.
It really is.
We also need to talk about infections here, endophthalmitis.
This is the term for inflammation of the vitreous, the gel inside the eye. Essentially, pus in the gel.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is catastrophic. The retina has almost zero tolerance for pus. The toxic enzymes from the white blood cells and the bacteria destroy the photoreceptors in hours.
Hours.
Yes. If you have exogenous endophthalmitis, say, after surgery or trauma, it is a race against time. If you don't clear that infection and inflammation immediately, the eye will lose light perception. It's that fast.
And finally, retinal detachment. The text mentions the vitreous pulling on the retina as a precursor?
The posterior vitreous detachment, it's a normal part of aging. The vitreous gel liquefies and shrinks. It pulls away from the retina. Usually it pops off cleanly.
But sometimes it's sticky.
Sometimes it's sticky. It pulls on the retina. You see flashes of light. That's the mechanical tugging stimulating the nerves. If it pulls too hard, it tears a hole. Fluid gets under the hole, and the retina peels off like wallpaper.
And the lights go out.
And the lights go out.
This has been an incredible tour. From the bulging orbit to the masquerading eyelid tumors, the scarring conjunctiva, the pumping cornea, the solidifying lens, and just the tragic autoimmunity of the uvea.
It really highlights that central theme we started with. The eye is a machine of precision. It relies on clear interfaces. The corneal endothelium must pump. The lens proteins must not clump. The iris must not stick to the lens. The vitreous must not pull the retina.
Small structural changes equal massive functional loss.
Exactly. Unlike the liver or the lung, you don't have reserve capacity. You need the light path to be perfect.
And that brings us to our final thought. The concept of immunologic privilege.
Yes, it's a provocative concept to end on. The eye is so specialized, so complex, that it effectively hides from the body's own defense system. It puts up do not enter signs to the immune system because inflammation would destroy that delicate transparency.
That hiding is a risk.
It is a massive risk because when that hiding spot is breached, when trauma exposes the inner sanctum, the body treats its own vision as a foreign invader. It reveals this incredible biological tension. The immune system is designed to protect us, but in the case of the eye, its protection is the very thing that can blind us.
Wow.
It is a tragedy of friendly fire inherent in our own biology.
A biological tragedy of friendly fire. That is something to mull over. For our listeners, we barely scratched the surface of the histology diagrams and the genetic details. So go open, Robbins. Look at the diagrams of the angle. Look at the histology of the corneal layers.
As we said at the start, this deep dive was the map. The text is the territory.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next deep dive.